Hello everybody, welcome to today's live stream. It's a live stream happening every Saturday afternoon. Just wanted to let you know today's topic, we're going to be talking about how to memorize piano music. Let me do this sound check real quick. Very cool. All right. So today's topic, once again, how to memorize piano music. And there's three things you need to understand about this, and I'll go over this in a little bit more detail throughout this live stream. But the first thing is that when we think about the traditional way of memorizing anything, actually, like the stuff they teach you in school, it just seems like a lot of stuff they teach in school is just not good for you. But that's another topic on its own. The traditional way of memorizing something or even studying for a test and whatnot is just wrong, and I'll tell you why. There's going to be two concepts you're going to need to understand and able to begin to memorize something. Without these two concepts, it's just not going to work for you. And the last thing, the last item on the agenda for this live stream is I'm going to give you a recommendation for what is actually the perfect software that will help you put all this into action. All right. So let's talk about memorization and why the method that they teach you in school and the way that we traditionally are taught that method, why it is wrong. And they call that the rote memorization. That approach is the wrong approach. You just use your own life as an example. If you're still in school or if you're a little bit older, that looks a little crooked. So let me kind of fix this angle. All right. So if you're in school, if you're a little older, think about back to when you took your last test, right? Now, if you took your last test, if you were like me, just like all the other people, all your other friends in school, all the other students, the second that they took that test, that let's not even say like a day later, the minute you walk out of that test, you probably have forgotten about like 99% of the stuff that you just studied for. Because just think about it, how soon did you forget everything? Like just like that, it was pretty instantaneous. Definitely like a day later and a week later, you have forgotten almost everything. And then why is that the case? Well, it's because of the approach itself. It's called rote memorization. So it's basically just blind repetition, day in, day out. Just think about like if you were, this is like, let's say if you're trying to remember someone's name, right? Let's say Deborah, right? So the traditional way you would sit there is like Deborah, and then you just keep saying that over and over. Deborah, 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 Deborah. And the second you stop, you're like, what was it again? And you totally forget, right? So with that type of, that method of memorization, you do remember in the short term, but you have to keep on constantly trying to repeat it to remember it. So it works in the short term, but you're going to completely forget it in the long term. And really good memorization should be about keeping it for the long term throughout, right? Because this one concept is missing from the way that they teach memorization typically. And that concept is it's almost like you have to get to a point where you almost forget something out. You even space out the repetitions of trying to remember, and that's actually going to strengthen it. So the better method, I don't know the exact word for it. Some other people have called it like the Feynman approach or something like that too. I'm just going to call it the recall method. It's basically another way to think about it is the tip of your tongue method. So let's say one day you were just thinking about where you want to eat, right? The restaurant, and you were thinking, oh, there was that one good restaurant I wanted to try. What was it? I think it was like, I'm just going to make up a name, but you're thinking, what was it? I remember it was on that street. It was really colorful. And you're thinking, I think the food was Italian. It was Ferranos, right? So they call that the tip of the tongue method, where you actually really have to engage to recall something. So you really have to think about it, like, what was it? And then you get it. Hopefully you get it, because it's the worst feeling in the world when you don't get it and it's on your mind all day. But when you finally remember, and there are studies that show when you do it this way, it just strengthens the memory that much further. So when you couple this with trying to recall it over time, just a quick primer, like the way I try to remember, like let's say I have students, I'm usually really good at remembering like almost everyone's names. I don't know why. I think you just get better over time because I have a lot of students anyway. But one thing I'll typically do is I space out the recall, right? So like throughout the day, maybe like 10 minutes later or maybe 30 minutes, maybe in the evening, I try to remember, all right, his name was this and yada, 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 right? So I repeat it throughout the day. And then when you're able to do this over longer periods of time, and when you're able to recall what it exactly is you're trying to remember, the easier it gets over, and then a longer periods of time, then that means that memory is just that strong. All right, now let's get into the two concepts you're going to need in order to begin this whole memorization process, as related to piano at least. It's also related to like pretty much any other subject, but let's talk about it with piano. And the first thing is chunking, this first concept, otherwise known as almost just knowing the form of music as well. And the second concept is spaced repetition. So with chunking, just think of the typical example. How do you remember a phone number? How is a phone number set up? How are the digits set up? Is it just 10 straight digits, right? No, it's not. If you're here in America, it's an area code, which is 3 digits. It's another 3 digits, then the last 4. So it totals 10, but when you chunk it this way, it's much easier to remember it, right? Think about the way we read sentences, like the words in a sentence. There's words in a sentence. If you just use this as an example, just type out a sentence on a computer and you just get rid of all the spaces. It's going to be ridiculously hard to read because we're used to spacing it out. So in the same way, that's how our brain works, and we apply it towards music. So in order to properly understand music, is the same thing as understanding like how to read and whatnot, and trying to remember and recall phone numbers. You have to know the form of it. You have to basically be able to tell one section from the other. Without this fundamental skill in music, if you don't know how to recognize the form, you're not going to be able to remember. All right. It might work with like easier pieces of music, but when you get more advanced, like you just can't do it that way. All right. Well, let's give you an example of chunking, right? And how it, to divide it up. And this is a little bit arbitrary, a little bit random. There are more formal methods, but you don't need to go that crazy. Some people like take it extreme. If we take like a sonata, right? I have to brush up on my theory. I hope I don't get this wrong. I think the first, they had the theme, which is like the beginning introduction. Then they had the development where it does something else. Then they had the recapitulation, which is you come back to the theme. And then instead of going to another key, you stay in the same key. So it's like, if you think of a sonata, that's like 3 different big sections. But within those big sections, you can refine it even further, okay? All right, just, like an introduction can have several parts. So if you take, let's start with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? Sorry. This is a super easy one to kind of split up. So if we take the first part, the introduction, I'll split that up into 2 sections. So if we call that whole introduction A, we could say this is A1, then A2. Now the B section is actually just a repetition, right? So B and B again, right? I think extra notes, but and then actually the ending, guess what? It's just A all over again, right? So we have 3 different sections in that way, if that makes sense. Hello. I got a request. This is the live stream. I think you totally don't know what's going on, bro. So you better listen to, I don't really understand. Let's say let's say, let me check out this live stream real quick. Tricks to memorize piano music. How to reliably memorize any piano piece. And this guy shows up. Hit the road, Jack, please. All right. Jeez, man. All right. Anyway, let's continue on. Rant over. So that's how you would formulate that. So you need to know the different sections, and then we're going to use this later. I'll show you how to input this later, but that's what I talk about with dividing, songs and whatnot. The little bit more advanced pieces, because they just tend to be longer, a little bit harder to divide up. So if we take something like Fur at least, right? As I rush through it. Right, like how many parts is that? That's like a really long section, so you have to be able to know how to divide that up. I won't go into too much detail of that, but let's say that is typically, you could go as far as like 4, 5, 6 different parts within just that one section, okay? All right, anyway, we'll talk about how to input this into the software that I recommend later. All right, now the second concept what we talked about, which I said earlier, is spaced repetition. This is super important, and this is something that's just fundamentally, again, not taught. And it's just something that I wish I knew. But, oh, look at this guy actually said March Turk again. All right, anyway, totally listening to me here. I'm talking about you. Anyway, all right, so, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm trying not to be so naggy, but all right, sometimes people drive me crazy. All right, let's say spaced repetition. And think of it this way. It's like if you're, I weight train. And if you're someone who works out in the gym and weight trains and tries to build a muscle, what is fundamentally important to do is when you're working out, you have to give yourself enough rest periods. If you don't rest, if you just work out every day like a lunatic, you're just gonna get injured. You're not gonna make any gains in the gym, right? So that's like you space out the rest periods. It's the same thing with memory. And it's almost like if you think about making an important decision, what is the best piece of advice when you're making a really important decision? Sleep on it, right? And so you have some time to think about it before coming to a gut decision. Anyway, so with the same thing with the memory, you have to give enough time in between each recall in order to strengthen the memory. Because if you keep doing it a day in, day out, you don't give enough time, enough space, it becomes, again, like the short-term memory we talked about. If you want to make the transition into longer term, you start to space it out. Let me give you a couple last examples with this whole spaced repetition just to really drive the point home. First one is that I remember when I was still back in college, and when we did our piano and juries, if you don't know what that is, it's like an examination you take at the end where you just play it in front of the entire piano faculty. Really scary. You get used to it after a while, but you present your pieces that you've been practicing up to that point. And what would typically happen, and I would say this in almost every college student, every one of my peers would say this, it's like a week later, we would always play it better and it would be a lot easier to recall it. And it's like, I never thought about it. I just thought like, oh, that's just the way it is. But if we really thought about it, what is that principle? That's spacing the repetition out. It was just the answer. I just think about it. It was just staring me right in the face. But even with college, even with those piano tests, a week later, we just play everything so much easier, so much better, and it's just really memorized. So people would argue that it's just you don't have enough pressure and the test is over, but that's I don't really believe that to be the case. I believe that the case to be that we didn't space out those repetitions further enough. The last example with this whole spaced repetition thing is a very famous pianist. He's still here. His name is Fleisher. I remember reading about, I think he did an interview in like one of the magazines that he was interviewed for. He was talking about how he prepares like his typical repertoire for a piano recital or piano concert or whatever. And it's really interesting because it's the same thing with spaced repetition. So he was on to something. He knew about it. I don't know why they didn't teach us this in school, but again, it's just something that's not taught. But what he said was when he's learning a piece of repertoire, what he would do, I don't know how huge the piece is he's working on, but let's say he's practicing it, he gets it up to concert performance, and he's able to play it from memory, and it's pretty good. And let's say that took about 2 weeks, right? Then he said what he would do, he's been practicing this like nonstop. He would drop it for a week, totally not think about it, come back, practice it again after a week later. Then he would go another 2 weeks, right, in between, and then practice it again later. Then he would go like a month, maybe like a 3-month period before practicing it again, half year, and then maybe about a year. Then he feels confident enough to present it to the public. Because when you do it that way, again, that memory is so strong, he just has it so ingrained that he's not going to forget anything, right? So that's one last example with that. Now, this software that I recommend that you download immediately is for free if you have a laptop or desktop computer. I think if you want to use the app, you have to pay for it. But if you're going to use the app, it's totally worth it, in my opinion, to pay for it. This software is called ANKI. ANKI. I think that's how you pronounce it. It pretty much talks about, it takes all the principles we talked about today, and it just does it automatically for you. Because look at the stuff we talked about today. It's kind of complicated if you want to develop a system to do it on your own. Good luck, right? This software just does everything for you, everything that we talked about. Let me show you how to use it. I'm not going to go into details with the ANKI. If you want to get a primer, there are a lot of videos on YouTube, or you can just search on the web like what it's all about. But basically, it's just a flashcard system that starts to automatically, each flashcard, depending on the difficulty it is to recall, because it actually lets you decide how difficult it was to recall. The one I have says there's 4 different levels. The first one is fail, the next one is hard, good, and easy. So let's say it was a fail. Within that session that you're reviewing, it's going to keep coming back a little bit more consistently. If it's easy, it's going to space it out. Sometimes it spaces it out so much that you won't see a flashcard within like a day or even a week. It's pretty interesting, right? So what you're going to do with this is, if you want to really memorize a piece, first you got the form. Let's just use Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So we have 3 different sections. We had A1, A2, and B. You're going to input 1 into the flashcard system. Each has a flashcard. So one flashcard is going to be A1, another flashcard is going to be A2, another one's going to be, sorry about the dogs, another one's going to be B, and then you put this into the system, and then it's cool because it's almost in a random order as well. So you don't just practice it beginning to end, which is not a good way to practice, right? So a flashcard will just show up, and then you just try to play it from memory, and then you judge it. You kind of give yourself feedback, which is super important, right? So you give yourself feedback, and let's say A1 came up, and then you pressed easy. And the whole point is to get to the point where all flashcards are easy, and then you pretty much have the whole thing, memorized. Because at that point, when you have everything memorized, it gets a little complicated, right? So what you could do is now you combine all 3 flashcards and you get rid of it, and then you just know the whole song, period, right? So instead of A1, A2, and B, you just have Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as one flashcard. And then you get to space that out over time. So the next one could be like, again, we're talked about like 1 day in between, 2 days in between, a week in between, a month in between. And I'm having a flashback back to my days at school where I was trying to learn some important concepts and a lot of these interesting textbooks that they had. I remember I got to a point where I had a flashcard system built up where some of these terms, I could go like a month in between and still remember it. So I used it in my personal life. I don't know why I never used it with piano. It's just I never made that connection. But you can get to a point where you have like 10, 20, 30 different songs. Like these are short songs, of course, by the way. But the same thing with if you're a professional musician, you get to a point where you have, 10 within your deck, right? 10 within your entire resume of practice. You get 10, 20 songs or pieces of music that you're working on just effortlessly memorized with the least amount of time. So yeah, that's that. Like you really need to use this. It's just an amazing piece of repertoire, okay? Yeah, anyway, that's it for today. So just a little bit of review. Let me go back here. If you want to memorize piano music, and the gist of everything that we talked about today was that the traditional approach to memorizing is wrong. The 2 concepts you need to know is chunking, or the form of the music, and space repetition. And the software, which is called ANKI, A-N-K-I, I'll put a link in the description, but you could just look it up on the web. The software that puts up everything, just takes all the guesswork out and does everything for you automatically. I think it could get to the point where even if you use it for practice, it will drastically cut down your time. Like I think it can save you like 40% of your time. It'll definitely to a point where you can even get half of your time that you don't have to waste. It makes you practice extremely efficiently, and then it's of course the memory thing. You don't even have to worry about that. Just thinking about all these years I never had this software, you're really kicking myself in the head. But anyways, this is an amazing piece of software. Check it out. Trust me, you won't regret it. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe, share, comment below. I'll see you guys next Saturday, and happy practicing.